Today, Jess Knutsen is presenting on due process for secondary transition students, the graduation protocol. Welcome, Jess.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody. So as Shannon said, today I will be doing our webinar regarding transition, specifically looking at graduation exit requirements and some of the due process requirements that go along with that. Feel free to any time if you have any questions to type those in and I can address those as we go. The big thing that we want to focus on when we're looking at high school students is that graduation planning, and even though it seems early, is starting to focus on that as soon as students enter into 9th grade. And graduation planning is basically the process of reviewing annually a student's present levels of performance. You're looking at their measurable post-secondary goals, their courses of study, their annual goals, and their transition activities. And you are going to decide as a team when they will be graduating. And having that discussion in 9th grade is okay. We want to have our goal be that our students will be graduating with their peers within that 4-year timeline. However, we do understand that there are students that work at a different pace and may require more than the 4 years to get the information they need and the education they need to graduate. One of the things to look at is that students do have a right to continue their education until the age of 21 if the IEP team determines it's necessary. And it is strictly based on those needs. And if we're looking at students who are going to continue with their education beyond 18 years of age, we can graduate them, or the team can graduate them based on whether they've met their goals or not, and they could graduate at 18 years, 19 years, 20, or when they age out at 21. The other thing to focus on too as well, and this is really good to explain to parents, is when we're looking at education beyond 18 years of age, is that we really start to focus primarily and really only on those transition goals, and students really aren't in the general education setting at that point. They should probably be in a special education setting or in a work-based learning environment. One of the nice things that students have and parents have with their children being on an IEP is district and state requirements. And as a team, we can determine what that student will need to do in order to graduate with their peers. And so having that flexibility to decide on what courses they're going to take, we don't have to stick straight with what the district or state is determining students need to graduate. Also looking at testing requirements we do have, instead of students taking the MTAS, of taking the MTAS, for example. And then also that flexibility of what goals they're going to have, and then if they're going to graduate on their goals or graduate versus credits. And that is always a discussion you should have every year, starting at the beginning of 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade with those parents. And of course, nothing's ever written in stone with our IEPs, and we do have the flexibility of changing those graduation goals that we have set for students. And typically, when we have students that are exceeding the age of 18 and staying in schools, really explaining those parents, like I said before, of that it's okay that we're designing specific programming for them. It doesn't have to be a full day, it can be a half day, it can be out in the community working or focusing in on it. All right. So when we're looking at students and their post-secondary measurable goals, we really want to focus in on what courses of study are going to help them reach that. And we do have the flexibility of deciding what those are as a team. For example, if you have a student who is looking at attending a 4-year university such as UMD or St. Scholastica, you really want to focus on those students taking those full academic courses that the district and state require them to take. And really without any modifications to that and minimal accommodations. And I would say it's okay to start even in 9th or 10th grade if students are coming in with some modifications, to look at maybe weaning those. And if that student is really struggling, Without that support, that's a good time to have a conversation with the team and the parents of maybe looking at another avenue such as a 2-year college and then transferring to a 4-year. The other scenario to kind of go over too is if a student maybe is not going to go to a post-secondary college such as a 4-year or 2-year but will leave high school into the workforce, looking at what programming and what classes are they going to need to take in high school to help them reach those goals. And that might be taking the vocational and functional classes within your classrooms, work-based class, of course participating in a work-based seminar, getting out in the community, maybe doing some job shadowing, and then as well as bringing any outside agencies such as vocational rehab, or if you need the county involved, whatever that may be, Social Security, getting them involved sooner for those students. And of course, which I think applies to any student, is that self-advocacy piece and their disability. And just a reminder, it is okay to be flexible, and that you don't have to keep driving in the direction that the district or state requires most students to go down to. The next slide that I've included here is specifically looking at the post-secondary measurable goals and activities or goals that you could do with the student to help prepare them for transitioning into them. So when you're looking at a college setting, for example, this is just a brief listing. There's more that could even be added to this, but just to get our brains going with it is that, of course, they're taking those academic classes with very little accommodations and then no modifications. Students need to have a really good understanding of their disability awareness. If you've ever participated in college for a day, for example, students have to have an understanding or be able to describe what their disability is, what their needs are, and that would be what their accommodations are, and then also talking about what their strengths are. Participating in college tours is another activity that students should partake in. Knowing and understanding the entrance requirements to take, practicing those. For example, the AccuPlacer, you can Google that online and find practice questions that students can do, and that's in the areas of reading and math. Same with the SATs and ACTs, preparing students for that. Helping students apply or understand financial aid, or if they are eligible, applying for scholarships is something else you could help them with. Knowing how and when to contact college disability services and really having that conversation of the differences between high school and college. And then, of course, those soft skills, which are really important for students to have that understanding of just organization, time management, interpersonal relationships, and then, of course, participating in any events that your school hosts to get these kids more involved. If you're looking at, for example, the military, researching those careers within the military, students do need to take the ASVAB for that, and remembering with that portion is the military tests do not allow any accommodations whatsoever, no calculators, so students really have to be well versed with that information. Again, limited accommodations in the classroom, and then, of course, taking as many academic classes as well would help them with that ASVAB, because that does cover a lot of your general academics. And then also assisting students with checking their medical background. And the nice thing if students do enter into the military is they do have medical for them. The students that we have that are just going to enter that employment field, what can we help them with in high school that's going to reach their goal is, of course, helping them with their applications and resumes, participating in the work-based program, having them complete some interest inventories. If they're unsure what exactly they want to do, is having them do these inventories to kind of narrow down where their strengths are, interests are, and then doing some job shadowing experience to see if that's something they're truly interested in. Participating in mock interviews, applying for the voc rehab services. There's also a YES program called Youth Employment Services that's run through Duluth for students interested in summer employment. Volunteering is another great thing that I think we don't encourage students to do enough of. Granted, it doesn't have that monetary value to it for students, but It's a really great opportunity. It's great on resumes, and it's just a really good idea for students that if they are unsure what they want to do, that they can kind of get their hands into things and maybe find out that helping people or organizations is something they're interested in doing. The up and coming one, of course, is the apprenticeship programs, and that's something I think students can take an interest in, and we have a lot of apprenticeship programs in the area that are more than willing to take students in and do some job shadow experiences, or they're more than willing to come into your classrooms to do some guest speaking opportunities. Independent living, some topics or goal ideas for those students that need focus on that is medical coverage, just understanding where to go to get that, housing options, knowing their rights as adults. Medications is a really important one that as students age, that parents and if they're taking it in the nurse's office, is really having those students focus on when they need to take it. Getting Social Security involved if that's a need for any disability or extra income there. Getting county involvement if you need anything such as waivers for some students. And just a note with that, the earlier the better. We would hope by 9th grade those students with developmental disabilities, if they haven't had a DD waiver, should by that point. Nutrition is another big area that students could use some focusing in on. Getting their driver's license or a state ID, as well as focusing in on that money management piece. The other option or flexibility we have with students on IEPs is that they can graduate based on their IEP goals. So an IEP Driven Diploma is one that's earned by the student if they've met those goals and objectives that the team has decided is appropriate for their needs. If you are doing this, I would suggest, of course, we're documenting that in the prior written notice when the team proposes this, but I would really encourage you to put a statement within the IEP, and I would look at either the present level of performance or even in the accommodations or modifications page, and just simply putting a statement that the team has determined that student will graduate based on their IEP goals and objectives. And the reason I encourage this is just if a new case manager comes in the next year or the student leaves to go to another school, it's easily accessible to find that information. And then I just included the blurb there from MDE on students will have the right to earn a diploma just like their non-disabled students. So Christina, I see you have a question on how early should we do this. I'm assuming you're talking about the IEP Driven Diploma, and that can be determined at any time. I mean, we predominantly see IEP Driven Diplomas with our students with severe multiple disabilities, developmental cognitive disabilities, some students with autism, and of course case by case. Again, that is up to the team in deciding when that is going to be proposed. For those students that I just listed, I would say you could have that conversation starting in 9th grade, and that just having that documentation within your progress reports that how they're doing on these goals is your documentation when you get to that point of when they're graduating. So looking at graduation eligibility, when may a student be exited from special education services? One is, of course, when they are graduating from high school, and the other one is when the student has exceeded the maximum age of 21 years old. So special ed instruction services are provided from birth until July 1st after the student with a disability becomes 21. And to kind of maybe simplify that some more is when a student turns 21 prior to July 1st, they will be exited from special education services. If the student turns 21 after July 1st, they are allowed to receive another year of free appropriate public education. But again, just because the student has turned 18, it does not mean they need to stay until they're 21. Again, we base all of that depending on the needs of that student. It could be a half year, another year, whatever that team feels is appropriate to meet the student's needs. So team decision IEP meeting, when we're looking at proposing a graduation date, it is done on a case-by-case basis, but it should be made at a meeting. I know when we get students in by 9th grade, we have that little anticipated date of graduation on the bottom of the first page of the transition. That is something we really need to cover, and remember, like I said earlier, our goal is our students will be graduating within the 4 years as their non-disabled peers, that they have the right to graduate with their peers, their class. And it's okay, 9th grade, that you're unsure at this point, but let's just project out that they will be graduating and then have that discussion in 10th grade, 11th grade, of if that's still the goal or things have changed at that point. But this should always be a discussion at our annual IEP meetings. Usually the final decision is going to happen during our 12th graders' start of their school year, so in the fall. And I understand that we do have students whose IEPs don't all expire in the fall but into the spring, but it is okay to have those meetings. I would encourage you to bump up your senior meetings to the fall. It's always nice to just kind of double check everything and make sure all the wrinkles are ironed out for their senior year, and if they were required to take some summer classes and didn't, at least we know in the fall and we can prepare for that, versus in the spring we find out they're credit deficient or something else that might have happened. In the fall, when you are proposing this, talk about the date that they'll be graduating in May or June of 2016. Talk about the basis for that decision. So why are we deciding this is that they're going to be graduating? And that can come from they're meeting their credit requirements for the district, they have met or exceeded state assessments, they will have met or are planning on meeting their goals and objectives, whatever that is. You can talk about they have met their transition needs, etc. Whatever your team feels is the basis for that decision. And then have that discussion of where you're going to write this in the proposed IEP. And I'll talk about this further into this webinar, but of course you have that anticipated graduation date, and then there's another spot that you could add it, which I'll explain later. If as a team you cannot make a final decision for that student and you're unsure, like for an example, it might be a senior and maybe they failed a class or two their junior year and they didn't take the summer classes they needed to, and now it's really dependent on that student how they're going to do their senior year. It's okay to wait. Maybe you're going to wait until spring and have that meeting, so waiting till January and discussing like how they've done that first semester, and maybe there needs to be some changes or no changes, or maybe the student does need a half a year, and it's okay to have those conversations with those parents of maybe we need to look at the student going until December of their next year, or maybe they need to do ALC the following summer and then they can graduate. Again, it's up to you as a team, but again, having those conversations with those parents earlier rather than later is well advised. Some of the graduation due process requirements that we want to look over. So first thing is when you have those senior meetings, you want to have on that team meeting notice that you are discussing that graduation date. And the reason we want that on there is because graduation is a change in placement. Students are exited from special education. Special education does not exist once they leave high school. So it's really important we put that statement in there that we are discussing their proposed graduation date of June 2016, whatever it may be. We also advise that you invite any outside representatives from any agencies that the student is involved with to the meetings, especially those agencies that have any financial bearing with the student, such as vocational rehab services or the county. And a couple reasons why we want to invite them is that gives them an opportunity to talk with the student and family in terms of what is going to be happening transition-wise from school into those programs full-time. And a lot of them, for example, Voc Rehab Services do have transition plans that they want to get our information from the schools in order to determine the plan that they're going to create. And if you can't invite them or something happens where they can't come, that is okay as well, but just make sure that you put in the effort to invite them. The other requirement that we have to remember is that we do need a prior written notice describing the student will be graduating. Again, because this is a change in placement and those services are ending, I will be going over in a little bit what the prior written notice looks like, so you could use as an example. And the other thing is to, of course, complete a summary of performance, and that is just a review. Basically, it's a short synopsis of that student's time with you in high school, reviewing over their academics, functional performance, and then your recommendations as a school or as a case manager for them in terms of transitioning out of high school into whatever they are going to do. Also including progress reports. Those should be completed obviously with they have met their goals. If they haven't met their goals, then they really should not be graduating, because remember, if they're graduating credits, we also want them to have met their goals so that they can graduate. And I would say being as descriptive as possible and including data in your progress reports, because again, any service provider can look at those. Colleges look at those as well. And then lastly, you're not required, but I would strongly encourage you to conduct an exit meeting towards the end of the year for the student. And this doesn't have to be a full-fledged IEP meeting, but having yourself, there's the case manager, the student and parents, the principal, and then whoever else you feel maybe has really worked hard with the student there. And it gives you an opportunity to really say congratulations to the student. And you can also give them all of that pertinent information they need, such as an IEP, their evaluation, prior written notice, progress report, and their summary of performance, which they will all need with them if they go to apply for any types of services as an adult. As I said before, I'd talk about where we're going to put specifically the language that we've decided when the student is graduating. So there is some specific language I would really like to see in the IEPs. The one, of course, which is already there is that anticipated date on the bottom of your post-secondary measurable goals page. So make sure that that is up to date. The other thing is just to double check your service page and make sure that your services are ending when that student is graduating. So not just including the date, but making sure that you have however many months until they graduate. So it's usually going to be less than a year. So double check to make sure that that is all accurate on there. And lastly, I would encourage you to put a statement on the modifications accommodations page, something to the effect of that Bob's graduation is proposed for June 2016. So making sure those three places have that documentation that was discussed at the IEP meeting, and then carrying that over in the prior written notice, and you should be good for that portion. So for the prior written notice, now remember that this is a requirement to send out to parents and the students. So whether you have a face-to-face meeting or not, we do need a prior written notice sent out, because parents do have to give consent that they agree that the student will be graduating and exiting from special education services. We recommend that you send this prior written notice home if you're not doing a face-to-face meeting about 1 month before they graduate. And that you include the summary of performance. I would strongly encourage you to call the parents if you're sending stuff home, if you're able to get in touch with them, to review over that summary of performance and explain what this is. A lot of our parents get used to receiving all of this paperwork and not maybe looking over some of this, but the summary of performance is really important, because this is the form students use when they're applying for disability services in college, or they're applying for any outside service support such as voc rehab, social security, etc. Jobs, you look at Trillium, they look at the summary of performance to see what the students need. And it's nice to go over those recommendations you have made for that student, so the parents can maybe take the ball from that point on and assist their child with that. I've included just some examples of what a prior written notice can look like for graduation. Of course, this is just an example, so You would individualize it for your student, but you can include this if you have an annual meeting in the fall for your 12th grader. You can include this within that prior written notice for the IEP meeting you've held. Just I would separate it from the other portion of the IEP. Again, you're proposing that they're graduating on whatever date that your district has set. The reason that the district is proposing, so this is where you would have that conversation of that you've looked at maybe the credit requirements, graduation requirements, you've reviewed their IEP goals and objectives, and that is your basis for why you're proposing this, and that they no longer will require special ed services due to their graduation. The other thing is if we have students who will be graduating based on their goals, you can explain that, just like in the statement below, is that the team has determined that the student has met their IEP goals and they have a post-high school plan in place. And I would be careful with that one, is you want to make sure then if they have a post-high school plan in place that they are truly connected with any outside agency support, whether it's the county or Voc Rehab, whatever that may be. Under the third box of that prior written notice, kind of describing what tools or data you've used to propose graduation, is you can look at progress reports from the student, you can look at their grades, credit checks, always including parent, teacher, and student input. Even though I don't have student on there, include student input, as well as service provider input, whether that's in-house or outside within the community in terms of graduation. And then lastly, for other options, I would encourage you, we always have a statement in here. There's always other options we can be considering for graduation. And I've included 3 different scenarios in there just for you to reflect on, to kind of brainstorm. For example, if we're looking at a student who's going to be graduating, maybe we have that discussion of maybe we want to postpone it and they wait another half a year due to credit requirements or goals. But then you can, on the other side of that, look at, well, they've met all of the goals and they are ready to graduate with their peers at this time. You could look at if you have students that maybe credit-wise could graduate a semester early, but then have that discussion, but are they truly ready? Have they met their transition goals, or have they met their transition needs? And having that discussion. That would be another option you could put down here as well. So it's really what you and the team decide, but making sure you always have something in here. There's always something that we have discussed or considered that we can put in here. And then lastly, for number 5 there, other factors relevant. Most times we see no other concerns were identified. If you're having an early IEP meeting in the fall for a senior, you could put in there that graduation is contingent upon earning whatever X amount of credits and progress on their goals. Just making sure then that you touch base as the school year progresses to make sure they are making progress on their credits or IEP goals. The summary of performance. So this is the required form for all of our seniors or students that will be graduating or exiting from high school. And this is found on SPED forms as well as through our website. We do have various other forms. I think SPED forms is probably the easiest to use. But what I would encourage, again, like I said, best practice would be to have an exit meeting where you can review over this. However, if that doesn't work, a phone call would work. And if that doesn't work, of course, sending that information home and understanding that we will be waiting for the parent's signature back that they agree with this. So the final paperwork that you want to send home with that student, and what I did as a case manager was I put all of this in a folder. I put in their final IEP, their evaluation, progress reports, their summary of performance, prior written notice, and any additional information you think might be beneficial, such as maybe contact information for other agencies. I know those schools within St. Louis County have that Life After High School booklet, which has a ton of contact information for our students in terms of transitioning into the real world. That could be something you could include in there as well. And then what I would encourage you to do is explain to students how highly confidential this paperwork is and that they should keep it in a safe spot. It's not something you just want to throw in your locker and forget about it, or throw in the corner of your closet. They will be required to bring this to colleges for disability services, or for any employment services. They will be required. Same with the county. If they're looking at later in life getting county involvement, they will be required to show this as well. The last part of this webinar, I'm going to go over the summary of performances and give you some examples of what you can put in there. And like I said before, the summary of performance is really a synopsis of their 4+ years that they are spending in high school. Some of it can get lengthy because it is a narrative of that piece, but just keep in mind that students also will be leaving with their evaluation. But you just want to paint a short picture of what overall their high school time was like academically, functionally, and then offer any recommendations you have as a team. So first, looking at the academic achievement. This is where you have the opportunity to describe their academic career. Courses of study taken, test scores both in the classroom and standardized test scores, district tests, any accommodations or modifications utilized, any paraprofessional support, grades, strengths, needs, any assistive technology. And I really highlight the accommodations, modifications, para support, and then assistive technology. Those areas, especially students looking at post-secondary education, are what those disability coordinators are looking at. And we really want to be truthful and honest with students that if they have a lot of paraprofessional support, we need to put that on there. If we don't, we're really setting those kids up to fail when they're entering into a college setting. I did include just a brief synopsis down below of potentially what can look like. Again, this is just an example, but it's okay to put their reading levels, their writing levels, their math levels in there. And putting the grade level there, that's okay. It's okay to put down in there any test scores that they've gotten in those classes. Maybe they've averaged B's in math or D's in English. Again, it just paints a picture for those people looking at this form in terms of potentially how the student is going to do or what supports may need to be set up. Put as much of the modifications as accommodations as are listed in the IEP there, and specifically what that student used on a consistent basis. Don't put stuff in here that the student didn't use but was on the IEP just as a backup. You can put any teacher comments that are in there as well of how they performed in certain classes or what teachers had to say about them. Any technology they've used, maybe it's predict-a-text or they've used a smart pen, had notes provided, any of that stuff that you feel will transfer over to a college setting that's going to help them. And then I always encourage a statement at the end of that student's type of learning. How do they learn best? Again, that will help them in determining what classes they're going to take at that college setting. And this also helps our voc rehab counselors because they do also offer or support our students with any type of training they may need for a job and determining what is the right field for them. The functional performance, this provides pertinent information that may help future service providers. And we're looking specifically at their strengths and weaknesses here. What is the student able to do in school and in the community, and addressing that level of independence and support they need. You want to talk about each of the transition areas within this, and I specifically put in there transition, sports, any extracurricular activities, employment, living situations, cooking, etc. Down below I did include some points that you should hit on when you are writing up the functional performance for your students. And so that's looking at, you have the ability or the approval to put down their general intellectual abilities. I would not put their IQ score, but I would give a range, such as the student's processing speed is within the average range or low average range. I would describe their general ability in that way and not putting that score. That score is confidential for that student. That's up to them if they want to disclose that or not. But if you're putting in those ranges for those areas for general ability, it does give people a pretty good idea of where that student is at with processing information. It's okay to put teacher comments in here, general observations that you've seen or teachers want to share. I would definitely touch on attention and organization. Are the students timely? Do they use any organizational tools that help them? How are they with being on task, turning in work, any of that stuff, again, that you think is going to carry over into whatever they are going to be doing after high school, that will help them. Communication is another area that you can touch on, both written and verbal. And it doesn't mean that they have to be receiving speech services to put a comment here, but just in terms of how they communicate with people. Are they introverted, extroverted? Some students really are attached to their case managers and struggle touching base with their general ed teachers. That's a statement I would put in there, and that they need to work on that. Social skills and behaviors, another area you could touch on, of how they interact with peers and staff and just their overall general behavior. Independent living skills, this is an opportunity for you to talk about, do they have their driver's license, don't they, a state ID, how are they with cooking, money management, do they have insurance or a plan for insurance, anything you can think of to include here. And this really applies for those agencies such as the county or employment agencies would look at this in terms of assisting the student with these. Self-advocacy skills, is the student able to describe their disability, their needs, their strengths? Are they able to ask for help? Include a couple sentences there for that student. Career and vocational, this would be an opportunity to describe any jobs that they've had within the school setting, outside the school setting. Maybe they got a job on their own. That's okay to include that on there. It just shows their independence and their ability that they really want to work and earn that money. And then anything else, I would put in here attendance. How is their attendance in school? Are they hooked up with any services right now that you want to put on here? I would encourage any outside agencies that students are with while in school, put down on here. Any awards they've received, any sports they've played in, and it would be even a great idea to put in there if they participate in mentoring day or college for a day or have toured colleges, whatever that may be, that would paint that picture of where they're currently at. The last part here is looking at those post-secondary recommendations. So what is it that you or the team is recommending for them once students leave high school that's going to help them carry out those post-secondary goals? And again, I just included a few examples for you. Within education, maybe it is you are recommending that student apply for disability services. Maybe you're recommending they meet with a disability counselor or advisor on a weekly basis until they're comfortable within that college setting. You can talk about them applying or connecting with their voc rehab counselor on a regular basis, or look at on-the-job training, military, social services. You can encourage students to apply for accommodations, and again, that'll be up to them when they go to college or any type of training program that they go to. I would list the accommodations here, however, of what you recommend they apply for. You could discuss courses the student may do well in or may not do well in. For example, maybe you have a student who really struggles in math, and instead of taking that in the fall, maybe they take that in the summer and get that hard class done so they can focus more on other classes they have to take. It's okay to recommend that you think they do a part-time versus full-time in college or taking those summer classes. For employment, again, options you recommend are applying for voc rehab, any type of supportive employment, Trillium, looking at Pinewood, for example. You could even recommend specific jobs the student might do well in. recommend apprenticeship programs, and you could recommend any contact people that would assist the student at this point. And being specific as possible is okay at this point, because it's not going to fall on us if students don't follow through, because they are only recommendations. And then lastly is looking at independent living piece of it. And then you can include in this recreational, leisure, community living, or home living. This is where I would include statements of applying for Social Security, if they haven't gotten their driver's license and are able to, doing that, or if they're not able to, learning about or getting bus passes for the DTA or Arrowhead Transit, whatever that they might need for that transportation piece. Recommending accessing health care, and maybe that's through the county involvement. Any recommendations you may have with housing, such as maybe they're going to need a group home or assisted living type situation. And then accessing any social workers for our students with developmental disabilities. Waivers, if you have students, which it would be unfortunate if they've gotten their senior year or graduating where they don't have a DD waiver or a social worker, but if they don't, it's okay still to make that recommendation if you feel that is what they need. As well as any money management budget information. You could say maybe they need to investigate Center for Independent Living Access North to learn about budgeting skills. So again, it's your recommendations that you have for that student, and it would help them with transitioning out of high school into the real world. So that wraps up our webinar at this point. I appreciate everybody who did attend this. If you do have any questions after this, please feel free to email me or call me, and I'm more than willing to do that.